All right, folks, welcome back to the channel, and we got a new type of segment for you. This is going to be the doubles disc review, and it is brought to you by our first sponsor on the channel, and that's going to be Saraland Pharmacy. I'm sure you're surprised a pharmacy sponsored this video, but Saraland Pharmacy is actually the best disc golf store in Southern Alabama. They carry a wide variety of discs from all the top manufacturers, including Innova, Discraft, Discmania, and all the Trilogy brands, as well as MVP and Axiom. They also carry plenty of plastic from lesser-known brands such as Lone Star Disc and Thought Space Athletics. Their pricing is fantastic. And speaking of pricing, they have a very robust used disc section where you can get some lightly used plastic for a fantastic price. And you can also pick up various disc golf equipment that'll help you along the way. So if you're in Mobile County or any of the surrounding areas, or heck, even if you're on the Eastern Shore, definitely pass on by the Saraland Pharmacy, as they have a wide variety of equipment that I'm sure you'll love. It's definitely worth the trip. You certainly won't regret it. All right, so now that we're back from that, let's set the table. The reason why we're both here doing this disc review is because I'm going to represent more of the amateur player. You know, I play kind of in that MA2 division, so I'm going to have that slower arm speed and the not quite so polished form. However, next to me, we have one of our local pros who is just under 980 rated. He's won several events here recently in the South region. I've seen this guy break the 500-foot barrier multiple times in person, so I know he's got the arm speed. And so it'll give you two different perspectives on what this disc might do for you depending on what level of player that you are. And why don't you go ahead and tell them what the first disc is going to be.
Yeah, so we're going to be reviewing the Copperhead from Lone Star Discs. It's a 3402. So it looks like it's going to be kind of a overstable putter approach disc. It's similar to a Pig or maybe a Ringer GT from Discraft. Why don't you tell them about the plastic?
Yeah, so this is in the Victor plastic, which is the main base plastic for Lone Star Disc. And actually all discs that have this Victor plastic actually float on water. And I think that's actually kind of neat because that's something that sometimes people really look for if they're playing a water carry hole and they want something where they hopefully have a better chance of getting their disc back. Hopefully this will allow you to do it. But I think the neater thing about it is most of the time, let's be real, those floating discs usually aren't very good. They usually are literally just for that sole purpose. So the fact that you get a disc that brings you a ton of value and it just has that added perk, I think is really cool. And kind of, you know, alongside what he was saying about it being kind of that Ringer or Pig type disc, it has about the same depth of a zone from just comparing the two. So if you're a zone thrower, which is kind of the, I guess, like hallmark of approach disc, I think, for most people who throw open bags, this is very similar. The only difference is it is beaded, so maybe it'll feel a bit deeper because of that. But it is nowhere near as deep as a Harp or the Saki Bomb Slammer. So it kind of fits in that middle area, not as shallow as an A2, but definitely not as deep as a Harp or a Saki Bomb Slammer. And so yeah, we're going to give it a couple different throws, backhand and forehand, and kind of give you an idea what the flight's like. So I guess I'll go first as the am, and I'm just going to try to throw a backhand kind of flat. Also, we have these cones kind of set up because Mac was actually giving me a lesson. So by the way, hit Mac up if you're in the Mobile area or you don't mind traveling to the Mobile area. He gives some great lessons for a good price. He's helped me out a lot, helped a lot of others. So definitely check him out. I'll also have his channels down below because he makes a lot of content on Instagram and YouTube. So check those links out below. So let that one go a little early, and we are facing a tailwind, so it got a little more stable than maybe it normally would. But definitely what I expected for the flight numbers and what the disc is, but now we'll let Mac throw one flat as well.
Yeah, so like Dustin said, I'm going to throw this one flat. I'm going to throw it about 70-80% what I would on a normal golf shot. Expect this to probably go around 250, 270, something like that. Right in there. The cones, Dustin didn't mention, the cones are set up every 50 feet, starting at 150 up to 350. So that landed between the third and the fourth row, which is right there about that 275 range. You notice it kind of flipped up a touch. So it looks like if you put some torque on it, you can get it to be really straight flying with a reliable finish.
Yeah, so with his faster arm speed, he definitely got a much straighter flight, so that's what you'll experience if you are kind of at that higher level. But for someone like me, who's more than amateur level, when I threw it flat, even though I did let it go kind of early, you could still see the flight it was going to have, and it just had like a pushing hyzer the whole time on a flat release, but still something that was totally manageable, not something that I felt like was too overstable for me or something like that. So we're gonna go pick those up, throw them on a couple of more angles, and yeah, let's see what we get.
So I went and picked those up. Mine was about 280, so right where we said it was gonna be. Threw it on the way back, threw it flat into probably a 10, 12 mile an hour headwind, and it's worth noting it did not flip over. I threw it flat and it held straight the whole way. It went about probably 20, 30 feet shorter, so looks like this is a reliable disc into a wind. Also worth mentioning, this plastic is pretty soft, so it's going to be good for sticking greens if you don't want a lot of actions or rollaways. So now I'm going to throw both of these. I'm going to throw one on hyzer and one on anhyzer and kind of show you the stability of this disc. So first we got the hyzer. See, that one was right there at about that 250 foot mark, so looks like, you know, didn't really get affected by the winds too much. Now we're gonna throw the same disc with the anhyzer. Tailwind definitely helped with the distance there, but looks like I got a pretty full flight. I actually came out of it entirely, got the full S line out of it, so it probably would have been about 300 feet that way, but looks like it's pretty good and torque resistant.
All right, so I'm going to give these a shot on some backhands again as well. I'm not going to bother throwing this on a hyzer into a tailwind because we all know how that's going to go. It's going to look a lot more dramatic than what he did, basically. Tailwind hyzer on this overstable disc, it's going to dive bomb for an amateur like me, but hey, that might be something that you need if you're just trying to do something short and you're trying to control your distance, or you're trying to get around a corner or something along those lines. So I'm going to throw a couple of backhands. I'm going to try to throw one better on the flat release than I did the first time, and then I'll try an anhyzer one as well. So I mean, yeah, on the flat release, I was able to get a decently straight flight for the first little bit, but definitely got that dependable fade, which is what you want in an overstable approach disc as an AM. And so now I'm going to try to put a little bit of anhyzer on this one, see if I can get the fight out. Babied that one a little bit. I didn't put on dramatic anhyzer, only a slight bit, but you can see it definitely fought it and flew really straight because I put it on that anhyzer angle, pushed a little bit more distance. So definitely something that you could probably flex around a little bit. More dramatic anhyzer angles would probably give you that turnover that you saw Mac throw and get that pan out. So with that said, that's some of the backhands, but we're going to throw a couple of forehands now to kind of give you some vibes on how it feels that way. All right, so now Mac and I will actually start throwing a couple of forehands here. Worth noting, we tested a couple of forehands on our way back to the camera into the headwind. I will say this disc wasn't a fan of the headwind, kind of just turned over on us. When I put it on some good hyzer, it did sort of pan out after turning over, so maybe that could be a useful shot, but I definitely wouldn't really recommend throwing this into a headwind with a forehand. Now, backhand into a headwind, as Mac was kind of saying earlier, it was actually kind of able to handle that and just kind of keep that straight flight. So it could be something where if you're trying to throw a straight putter shot on the backhand into a headwind, this disc might be able to get the job done as opposed to something that's neutral or understable that's just going to roll over. But anyway, we're going to throw some forehands now. I'm going to attempt to throw one mostly flat, maybe some slight hyzer, kind of my bread and butter for what I like to do for approach shots. I'm not going to like put too much on it and try to get some crazy distance, but just kind of throw that typical 150 to 200 foot chip shot that I would like to do with a disc like this. Got a little bit of wobble on that flight initially, and I think a lot of that has to do with just like the beaded feel of it. I've never really personally been a fan of like beaded approach disc or beaded mids. It kind of makes it a little bit harder for me to get a grip on it. If you're cool with that though, I mean, as you can see, got a nice little straight flight, got some dependable fade. That's exactly what you want for that 150, 250 foot approach shot, so to speak. So definitely felt pretty good out of the hand stability wise, and now we'll let Mac throw one with a little bit more anhyzer on it.
Yeah, so like Dustin said, I'm going to try and throw a little bit higher up, slightly chopped over forehand with this. I will say this is a pretty shallow disc, so it feels good for forehands, at least for me personally. I don't like very deep stuff. I don't think a lot of people do for forehands, but yeah, let's see how this holds up to it. Got a pretty clean release on it, not quite as much turn as I wanted, but you saw it looked like it was still going to fight out even with that extra turn. So it looks like the wind did kind of calm down a little bit, so it looks like in calmer conditions this is a very reliable forehand disc.
So now that we've done a good bit of throwing at this point, some that you've seen and some that we've kind of done off camera, I'm going to kind of give you some final thoughts on this disc. Basically, just to kind of give you a rundown, I find this disc to be about the same depth as something like a Zone. I really kind of think it has that similar, like, kind of medium feel. You know, it's not nearly as shallow as like a Suspect or an A2 or like even the Harpoon from Lone Star Disc, but it's certainly not nearly as deep as, say, a Harp or the new Saki Bomb Slammer. In fact, I think this feels very similar to the OG Slammer from Trilogy, or potentially something like a Pig, if that's something that you like. Also, what I'll say about it stability-wise is it fits kind of right near a Zone, in my opinion. It's nowhere nearly as overstable as something like an A2 or a Justice or an Ursus, but it's definitely not as understable as something like a Suspect or maybe some of your other more understable approach disc. So for me, I think this is a really good approach disc if you're kind of wanting something with that medium overstability that kind of has that average, you know, deepness to it, as opposed to something that's really deep or really shallow. My only gripe with why I might not like throwing it is never been a person who's been a fan of the beaded stuff. Like, just for whatever reason, it's a little bit harder for me to get a good grip on it and just get a clean release. The only exception being the Justice, because that's like more shallow and more of a utility disc. So with that said though, if you're okay with a beaded, you know, approach disc, this disc is actually really good. Like, the feel of it's nice and tacky and rubbery, so you can get like a really good grip on it in probably any kind of weather conditions. And it has that soft landing that you would probably want and not get you any ground action. So it's a good disc. I mean, I think Lone Star is pretty underrated. And in all honesty, this is a great piece of plastic.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Dustin said. He hit on some points that I wanted to bring up, which was the plastic feels really good. Nice and tacky. I think in any sort of wet conditions, this is going to be a go-to approach disc for you. And also, like he said, it's kind of like a Zone, but I always like to describe it as it's a Zone with a step down in speed. So it's not going to go as far. It's going to be a little less reactive to stuff, but I think it's a slot that everyone really needs in their bag, something that's reliable, that is for that 200 and in shot. I think, honestly, you would go to this in an open field, you would go to this for every shot 200 and in. So I think it's great. I think if you're looking for something like this in your bag, you should definitely check this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks so much for tuning in. This is kind of a new segment for me on this channel. And again, if you're appreciating it, please do subscribe, like, all that jazz. Also, Ben, shout out to Saraland Pharmacy for providing us these discs and supporting the channel for this review. Again, also shout out to Mac here, who kind of served as my pro to give us a little bit of a comparison on what these discs will fly like for different arm speeds. And again, go give Mac a follow. I'll put his links down below. He puts out some great content on Instagram and YouTube. And again, if you're in Southern Alabama and you're looking for some lessons on how to step up your game in disc golf, definitely check out Mac for that as well. Without further ado, we're going to sign off until next time. See you then.
Later.